fact that I've been here for 27 years living in the UAE, and for me it's been such a pleasant and wonderful experience. So I'm now on a mission to discover other people's experiences on how they have made the UAE their home. Today, I'm at the Sharjah Research and Technology Information Park, which was established in 2016 by royal decree of His Highness Sheikh Sultan bin Mohammed Al Qasimi, ruler of Sharjah. The Sharjah Research, Technology and Innovation Park, SRTIP, aims to develop and manage an innovation ecosystem that promotes research and development and supports enterprise activities under triple helix collaboration of industry, government and academia. And today my guest is the Business Development Director of SRTI, Mr. Talal Thabet. This will be an episode full of research, technology and innovation. So Talal, let's hear about yourself. Who is Talal? What is your background?
Oh, well, it's a long story. Do you have enough film today?
Certainly hope so.
Okay, well, I was born in Aden, Yemen, back in 1970. About 6 months later, my father worked for the UN, so we were moved to Mogadishu in Somalia in very early 70s. And then grew up there, had a fantastic childhood there. It's just, growing up in East Africa is such a privilege. I don't think you realize it as a child, but it's absolutely wonderful. And straight after that, my father put us in American schools. And the American schools that we went into obviously had American teachers. And therefore, what do you do as a child? You mimic your teachers.
Exactly.
The interesting thing is my father moved around from country to country based on his work for the United Nations. He worked for the United Nations Development Program, the World Health Organization, the Environment Program in Kenya. We went to Beirut, I remember, in 1980, in the summer of 1980. And that was my first time that I had to actually speak Arabic.
Okay. Because you moved over to Lebanon, so you changed location. Okay.
Yeah, so we moved to Beirut in the summer of 1980, and it was my first time that I actually had to speak Arabic, right? Because my friends in the playgrounds spoke Arabic. And so I had to pick up the language at the age of 10, right? And it was interesting because I was going home with a Lebanese accent to a Yemeni mother. Didn't work very well. Didn't go down very well, shall I say. But she was just simply pleased that I started speaking Arabic.
Yeah.
In the summer of 1982, we were evacuated from Beirut to France because of the, I suppose, there was a war. Israel was bombing Beirut. The F-16s were in the air. Airports were closed. Borders were closed. Bridges were bombed. How do we get out of Beirut? Age of 12. My father was able to secure a French liner from Junay Bay in Lebanon.
Okay.
And we were taken to Larnaca, where 300 United Nations families were given instructions on where to go, which was France. So we ended up in Marseille, and from Marseille to Paris, where these families ended up being distributed around the world. Some sent home and some sent to other places. We were sent to New York.
Okay.
Which was fantastic.
So it's like we're going around the whole globe here at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Every continent.
Absolutely.
But it must have been a very interesting childhood. So.
It was. In retrospect, you obviously feel privileged. But at the time, it's tough because you just made friends.
Yeah.
And you don't want to say goodbye. And then you go to a new school, new environment, and you have to do it all over again. You have to communicate, and you have to establish relationships, and you have to figure out who to trust and who not to.
Where you fit in and all that kind of thing.
Indeed. I graduated from Baghdad. That was the last station that I went to where I was living with my father and mother. So That was 1987, I think it was, where I then moved to the UK to work on my first degree. My father felt I should do computer information technology.
Okay. That probably was the hype back then.
Indeed. This was, the late
When
80s,
it's booming,
right?
as they say. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I did that, and my first job was working for an investment company in the city of London, and I started selling insurance.
Okay.
I did very well. I think I got lucky, but I did very well. And in a very short period of time, I hit my targets, and I was then asked to look into being a stockbroker and seeing if I could study for my Series 7, the trading license.
Okay.
Did that, enjoyed it, and then there was always something missing for me in London. I've always loved the arts, and so I asked my father his permission at the age of 22 to go and study fine arts.
Okay.
So I ended up in Detroit,
So was
Michigan.
that after you finished a degree in IT, or did that?
Yeah, I finished IT.
Okay.
And went and became a stockbroker, and then had something missing in me, and so I decided to go and study fine arts.
Interesting.
I did fine arts in Detroit, Michigan. Bitter cold. I don't think I knew what I signed up for there. Fantastic school, part of the Detroit Museum of Art. Absolutely brilliant teachers, absolutely inspirational environment as an education.
Mm-hmm.
But the city had a lot to be desired, shall I say. Very high crime, a very depressed economy.
But that was where I believe all the car showrooms used to be, and the manufacturers, didn't they?
Yes.
And they closed down, so
Yes.
it ended up in a
Yeah, and there was riots in the
big
past and things like
depreciation
that.
in the area.
And so the economy dropped, and when the economy dropped, it never picked back up again.
Yeah.
Or certainly not when I was there. I hear now it's very different. Okay, so I did that, and I had a situation in Detroit that just I couldn't get over. I don't necessarily want to talk about it on camera,
sure.
but I couldn't get over it. And so after 3 years, I'd go visit my parents wherever they were stationed in the summer. But on my third year, I came back to London to find out that my oldest brother was getting married.
Okay.
So I stayed and got a job in marketing, okay, selling advertising space in magazines.
Interesting.
And that was commission only. So you won't believe this, but the reality of that job was no salary. You get paid a percentage of what you sell. And at the end of the week, if you do not sell, you owe us 110 sterling pounds.
Oh, wow.
For taking the space of that desk. So it really motivates you to sell. Again, I got lucky and I did really well. And the competition came and headhunted me to work for them on a salary. So all of a sudden, I made it a beginning of a potential career. Worked in publishing for a few years, ended up working for the Daily Mail, which is the largest newspaper in the UK. And while I was at the Daily Mail, I'd inherited sales reps from around the world. And they represented the Daily Mail group to sell their products. I thought it was absolutely amazing that one of their reps for the Middle East, or the rep for the Middle East, was in the UAE.
Okay.
So I decided to come and visit and meet with the rep and go to a couple of events at the Trade Center.
Wow. So I guess the next question would be is, you mentioned about your work, and what actually brought you, or when did you actually come here to the UAE? And before you came here, what are your expectations? Because
Right.
you'd spent some time obviously in the Middle
Yes.
East, but
Yeah.
it's not always the same, is it?
Right.
So what were you expecting before you came here?
It was a mixed bag, to be honest, right? I didn't know much about the UAE in the late 80s, except that I met a person from the UAE in my first year of college in 1987 who gave me the picture. All right.
It's interesting because we find that we've quite a few people, even some we had on the show, they had the initial introduction to the UAE, or they were given, the realistic picture to some extent before coming over from someone who happened to be from the UAE abroad. So
absolutely. So the only impression I had of the UAE was what my friend told me in the first year of college of living in the UAE, which sounded very similar to my childhood in Africa. Wholesome, fun, sunny, beautiful oceans and beaches, and safe, right? So you asked me when, February 2000, I was asked to come to visit the UAE for the first time in my life. I picked up the phone and called my friend and said, guess where I am? I'm in the UAE. So he came and picked me up and he took me to this beautiful restaurant next to the ocean. And it was, 9:00 at night, and we were sitting listening to the waves hitting the rocks while we ate beautiful food. And I thought to myself, I really need to figure out London because this is beautiful. I love it here. So when I went back, I made it a point to tell the Daily Mail group that we really should open up offices in the UAE. It's an emerging market. It's up and coming. Now, this was February 2000. Mm-hmm. A year later, I found myself being headhunted by a company here in the UAE.
Okay.
And I came to talk about the contract in April 2001. Mm-hmm. I haven't left since.
Okay.
The job was a step back in my career. The salary was certainly a step back in my career. But the benefits and the quality of life far outweighed what I was getting in the UK. And so I took it gladly. And here's an interesting thing, Ismail. What happened to me in April 2001 was a trajectory that completely changed my life. Literally 10 days after I landed in the UAE, I went back to the UK and married the girl of my dreams.
Okay.
Because I knew then that this is where I wanted to settle.
So, I guess, you obviously said, you came here and that whole aspect of you being with your friend, having dinner, but what really stood out to you about Sharjah, about the UAE? So, Talal, were there any cultural challenges when you came here?
Right. Well, you have to remember, I'm an Arab. I'm from Yemen, with a Western perspective on life until I came here, but with core Arab values that I was raised with. And so, as I lived in the West, there was always something missing. I was never home. I was never part of society. I always felt that I was a little bit different. And certainly society made me feel that way. When I came here, automatically I felt welcome. I didn't have to assimilate. I wasn't being forced to assimilate, right? But then the other factors, the quality of life, the safety, the economic growth, the opportunity, the clarity in being able to project and predict growth. The resources were immense in terms of what you could do with your team, with the people you managed, with the product that you were distributing, with industry. The growth was phenomenal. And I could see that. I could breathe it. I could smell it in the air. It's not money, it's opportunity. An opportunity for so much.
we find a common point that's always brought up by people, no matter what nationality, what background they're from, when we speak to them, is the same thing of the quality of life. Very big aspect is this, like you mentioned, safety, feeling at home, feeling that, everyone can blend in. And we know that the UAE in general has so many hundreds of different nationality, and everyone seems to get on with life. And sometimes it's not like that in other places. So it's interesting that there's that common trend. What I wanted to move on now is the fact that you came here and you're currently working as the Director of Business Development for SRTI, the Sharjah Research and Technology Innovation Park. I hope I got that correct. So maybe you can explain a bit about what you do now and what is SRTI?
Okay, I'm glad you asked, because if you didn't, I would have told you anyway. I think now that I've been here for 20 years, the SRTIP, the Sharjah Research Technology and Innovation Park, is really where I should have been this whole time. And I think the 20 years I've been here has been leading me to this, the economic growth, et cetera, and certainly my own personal growth. And I'll explain why. What it symbolizes is innovation, the future. But if I were to explain it to you in a single sentence, it would be SRTIP supports companies that make the world a better place.
Okay.
That's our job. Our job is to support innovation, provide the environment, provide the market access, and provide the ecosystem for startups that focus on making the world a better place, the opportunities that they need, right? So I genuinely believe that an environment like this was designed for a belief system like mine, which is equal opportunity, support the innovator, support someone who's willing to work hard enough, support someone who's found a solution to a problem, support someone who wants to change the world. They always say that 99% of the world are pessimists, and they're 99% right. And only 1% of the world are optimists. But when they're right, they change the world.
Interesting.
And that's who we want to support. People that want to change the world, people that want to make the world a better place, environment, climate, technology, water, whatever these problems are, energy, etc. So the park is about that ecosystem that provides that support. And if I were to go into a little bit of detail, a lot of people would probably think that the park it's just another free zone, Talal. That's what it is. Talal, it's just another free zone. No, it's not. Okay? I would tell that person respectfully, there are dozens of free zones, but there are only 3 innovation parks in the UAE. And an innovation park does what a free zone does in its sleep, and then wakes up and supports innovation. What we do is we provide an ecosystem that allows students to engage corporate life in order to better their, say, prototype. We give them the opportunity. So we have the Sharjah Open Initiative Lab. This lab is specifically inhabited by millions of dollars of machinery. And this machinery is to be used by people that don't have the access, the financial access, to buy these kind of machines, and need access to these machines in order to create their prototypes, in order to finalize their studies, in order to talk to engineers so they can be taught how to use these machines in order to develop their ideas.
Yeah, I think I passed through that lab, and I believe that's where they do laser printing and metal printing and
a whole host,
all kinds
fashion. Even things as fashion. There are sewing machines there and things like that. 3D printing on metal and many different materials. Then there's the academia. Don't forget, we're in the heart of the largest collection of universities in the UAE.
Yeah, of course.
We have 22 universities here. We have, I think, over 40,000 students.
Probably on even on a worldwide scale for a particular city.
Right.
We may find it hard to find
Yes.
something similar in the world, let alone
Absolutely.
just in the UAE.
Also, access to 2,000 PhDs. That's human capital that anybody who's here at the park can reach out to and collaborate with and debate with and design with and build with.
What you mentioned there is the fact that this place is about innovation, and you mentioned the fact about the universities, and we see that so many aspects within the university push and promote innovation. For example, just came to the top of my mind, so far, Sharjah University, for example, is the only university that offers full specialization in nuclear engineering.
Correct.
So it's innovating there. So the fact
Indeed.
that you're close to the universities, you're in Sharjah. Sharjah is really pushing, as I'm sure you're going to elaborate on, is really pushing. So since you've been here, obviously, the industry or Sharjah has really pioneered in, the industry you're in, the research and technology and innovation field.
Absolutely. Ismail, one of the things that we're blessed with here in the UAE is the leadership, by far. I'm sure you've lived around the world. I've lived around the world. The leadership here, I've never seen like anywhere else in the world. Okay? And I'm not saying that because we're on camera. I'm saying that because they should be a case study, right, for other leaders around the world to take a look at their passive, supportive, progressive way of thinking and their application of that thought process, right? I love the fact that His Highness Sheikh Dr. Sultan Al-Qasmi, who's the chairman of the SRTIP, wanted a hub for innovation, wanted a hub for the support of the students and their ideas to grow. So we mentioned market access, right? Okay, so you're a student in Germany, let's say, and you've got an amazing idea that you really need to have supported. You go to the Innovation Park in Germany, and they provide you with the ecosystem, but you still need financing. And financing is not going to come until you can actually build a prototype and show a case that your idea works. Understandably. And that's how it is all over the world, as it is here. But the difference here is that we'll introduce you to the venture capitalists if your technology warrants it. We'll even open opportunities for you to work with certain corporations or government entities. And this is a directive directly from the leader in terms of supporting innovation. How many leaders around the world do you know commit to something like that? Commit to a building like this? That's phenomenal to me.
Yeah, so like you mentioned, there's just we could probably talk about this for so long and about the how much Sharjah really is pushing and it really is pioneering and has been pioneering for some years within technology and innovation and research. We probably couldn't do justice, to be honest, but it's been great to have you here to tell us about your story and how you've. So once you got here, what stood out? What stood out for you here in Sharjah? What was the places that stood out to you?
Everybody remembers the economic crisis of 2008 and 2009 and how it hurt the whole world. And yet, the compounded annual growth rate in Sharjah was 6% during that time. I don't really need to explain much of how this economy works, except with that simple example that you can compare apple to apple, right? I mentioned to you earlier at the beginning of this, my love for art.
Yes.
And there's no other place in the region, if you love art, to be in. Sharjah has the the most number of art galleries and art museums and artistic treasures than anywhere else in the region. The art museum here has 80 galleries, Ismail. 80 galleries, so easy to compete with any gallery in Europe. Okay, it has the Islamic Civilization Museum with art from the 7th century. 7th century, right? And then, of course, there's the Classic Car Museum. I'm a classic car lover, right? And the Classic Car Museum here is phenomenal, and it can compete with any collection of classic cars.
Great. So I guess in a nutshell, just as we end off, we can say, if you're looking for technology, research, innovation, art,
Absolutely.
classic cars,
Absolutely.
then Sharjah is definitely. But
and don't forget the amazing beaches.
Amazing beaches. Well, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show, and as always, you've brought a different angle, a different story, a different interesting aspect to glimpses of Sharjah. So thank you very much for coming on.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you.